What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We are finally back, actually live, after a little bit of a break last week. So, yeah, welcome. We have a really fun conversation today. We're going to be breaking the stream up into two parts, as I mentioned in the chat. The first part of our stream is an interview with photographer Jamie House, talk about the G9II and work on some of the projects that she's been doing recently. And then the second half of the stream, we're going to be talking really just kind of more of the open AMA, talking about some of the questions that y'all have had over the last couple of weeks that I've seen you posting in a lot of our videos, to hopefully try to get y'all some more answers about some things that you've just got some questions in general about. So, before we dive too far into this, I want to remind everybody that these are live broadcasts, so if you have questions, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA in the chat, as you can see a couple others are doing. That just helps me see those questions that you may be asking so that we can try to get to as many of them as we can during the actual broadcast. If we don't get to your question during the stream, don't worry. We do monitor these afterwards and try to make sure that we include them in the following week's stream where possible. If it's something that takes a lot more in-depth research to kind of get you a true answer, then I'll try to call that out everywhere that I can. So, yeah, outside of that, I want to remind everybody about LUMIX Pro services. In the United States, we have two tiers. We have the Red and the Platinum tier. Red is totally free. If you have purchased a LUMIX camera, make sure to follow the QR code on the screen or the link down in the description to get yourself registered on LPS Red. If you're someone who likes maybe a little bit higher level of service and support, and you just like having that resource available to you, make sure to take a look at the Platinum series. That is our paid level service, but that gets you a number of added benefits over the basic tier. Such as 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you drop or break something, you get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways when you have an issue and you do need to send it in. You also get annual sensor cleanings, EVF cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all the kind of maintenance stuff that you would normally want to do between seasons if you're, following a seasonal path for your work. But you also get access to a member hotline. So if you're someone who prefers to speak to a person instead of going over emails or chat, you do have access to that during normal business hours, which are based on the East Coast. So definitely take a look at those services if you're in the United States and either of them are you see of beneficial or of benefit to you. And again, as a reminder, the Red tier is free. So if you've bought a camera, get yourself registered on it. It's free. It's kind of just... it doesn't make sense not to. Just put it that way. So, let's see here. I just want to see a couple of the things here. See some familiar faces joining us in for the stream here. We've got, let's see here. Lots of good questions so far. So just as a reminder, if you're just jumping in, we will be addressing a lot of the questions in the second half of the stream. So with that, I would like to introduce everybody to Jamie. He's one of the LUMIX ambassadors, and yeah. So how you doing, Jamie?
All right. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Can't complain. It's a rainy, cool-ish day down here in Austin, so it's a nice break from everything that we've been having. And I know for you, it's been a nice break up there as well.
Yes. Here in Dallas, we're all excited about the rain. That is true.
So, for a lot of the people that have been joining LUMIX Live for a while, we haven't really done an interview session in quite some time now. But but before we talk about the G9II and the project and all that kind of stuff, could you let everyone know a little bit about yourself? Like what got you into photography? What kind of work do you do? That kind of stuff.
I'd be happy to. So I have been a professional photographer for, we'll say 10 years. We'll cap it at 10 years. But I specialize in product, like commercial beauty, like physical products themselves, as well as working with models. I dabble in fashion. Fashion isn't huge in Dallas, as you would expect. We got the big hair, but not much fashion. And then kind of just been dipping my toes for the last couple of years into kind of the more documentary kind of journalism sort of side of things, which is very exciting, which is what we'll touch on today.
Yeah, yeah. So, obviously for quite some time now, at least for most of my 8-ish years here at Panasonic, we've worked together over the years that we've been here, and you've been pretty involved with the Lumix cameras for quite some time. Could you give everyone maybe a little bit of a history into like the cameras that you've used, that you've worked with over the years, with us at least?
I want to say I got involved with Lumix, or using their cameras in 2016, I think. That's maybe sounds right. Somewhere around there. I should get myself a little timeline going. I don't remember. But I do know that it was with the GH4, which is just the perfect camera. I've been fully invested, as many people have been, in a totally different camera system. You know, bought all the lenses, bought all the macros, bought all the primes, had a couple different camera bodies, and I used the GH4 for about an hour. I was like, oh, this changes everything. And it absolutely did. Just even changing from a mirrored camera to a micro four thirds camera, or to a mirrorless camera, changed my style, changed the way I shoot. Just that instant feedback was such a huge advantage. You know, being able to like swing out the articulated screen and, you know, move the camera. Like, you don't have to be eye level with the camera. The camera can move into unexpected angles, and, you know, all of that stuff just completely sold me on it. Yeah. So GH4 for sure, and then the G9 was my big love as far as camera. Gosh, 5-6 years. So I'm very excited about the G9 Mark II.
It's actually why I was super excited when we were leading up to, you know, starting to get these cameras out into like y'all's hands, to be able to be like, oh, like Jamie's on the list to be getting the camera. I remember as like moving through the series and knowing that the photography side is what we've really kind of emphasized as the focus with this camera. You know, it's a nice little change, in my opinion. For those that follow the stream long enough know that I do lean much harder into the photography side of our cameras, but with everything being so video focused in our line, finally getting a camera that's like, you know, yes, this was built for photographers. Yeah, we're not going to ignore video, because you really can't these days. It's kind of like a death sentence if you do. But I think that actually kind of leads, you know, kind of right into it, because you know, being someone who's had early hands-on experience with it and actually went out and shot some projects with it, you know, what were your, you know, kind of initial, you know, feelings when you started working with the camera?
It felt like no time had passed. No, it really did. It felt like such a natural progression to the G9, the original. Kind of like meeting an old friend again after a long period of time. You know, obviously it has lots of new bells and whistles that are very exciting, I'm sure we'll talk about today. But no, it was just as effortless and easy to use as the first one. The kind of photographer and dabble in video, I do very little. I do just enough that if I can say that I do it, I suppose. But I don't love getting bogged down in the technicalities of what a camera can do. I'm very impressed by the long list of specs and, you know, all the numbers and the whatevers that it can do. That's great. But I like to have a camera that I can use straight out of the box. I don't have to go learn a whole new system. I love the advantage of all the new features, and, you know, where that helps put my work, you know, in comparison to my peers. But yeah, just being able to use the camera straight out of the box without having to really, you know, take a step back and think about it and dive through your menu systems is kind of great, especially when you're on location, because you don't have time to go fiddle with the newest, the coolest features, which they're nice to fiddle with, but like you gotta be able to go.
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, I think, been one of the kind of, you know, threads that we've tried to to make a fairly common piece through a lot of the Lumix cameras. Whether you're someone who's picking up, you know, an S1H and you're looking more in the cinema side, or you're picking up, you know, G9 Mark II, you can pretty seamlessly move, at least in the modern era of our cameras, you could pretty seamlessly move through all of them. And the G9, for those that in the chat that may be looking at a G9 and or, you know, kind of contemplated at one point but don't know, you know, whether or not you want to move up or not, to me, the menu systems in these cameras, knowing that the modern versions are derivative of what we started on the G9 and the GH5 back in that era, really does kind of make it, you know, as you said before, it's kind of like coming back to an old friend. Like, you just pick it up and you kind of go with it. So when you went out for the project, actually, we should probably first start this and say, like, so the project that you shot for the G9 Mark II, could you give us a little insight into what you ended up choosing to do for the photo project and stuff that we did for the launch?
I'm happy to. So I had the honor, the privilege to do a portrait project with the new G9 Mark II, which ties in nicely with what I do here at home. And I kind of mentioned a little bit that I've been dabbling in kind of the documentary sort of photojournalism side of things. And I got into that last year, 2022, when a friend of mine who is a textile expert, she approached me with a project that is called Around the World in 80 Fabrics, and they're a nonprofit organization. And they're founded by two Nat Geo people. One's an explorer and one is a expedition leader. I always forget. And they're just the most fabulous women I've ever met. Tierney Tees and Carol Dunham. One of them is a marine biologist and a marine conservationist, and she's done, you know, all the documentaries, and she does TED Talks and all these other amazing, amazing things. She has the craziest stories. And then Carol, who is she's the expedition leader. She's based in Nepal for about 30 years. And she lives there with her husband, who's a Nat Geo photographer. And yeah, just fascinating people. And man, can they move in a room full of important people. I'll tell you what, it's something to see. But anyway, so yeah, they founded this project called Around the World in 80 Fabrics, which stemmed from this desire to get away from fossil fuel-based fabrics, because we've got so much of it that it's just, you know, accruing in dump sites around the world, and kind of move into more like biodegradable natural fibers, like back to what, you know, how we used to dress and how we used to use fabrics and textiles before the modern age. Yeah, it's just a really fascinating collection. It's huge now, the collection. I think when they started, they had like 20 fabrics of just anything you can think of. Of course, you've got your wools, you've got your cottons, you've got your leathers, depending on where you're at in the world. But now they're looking at new things like making fabrics out of fruit juice waste, which is wild. It's kind of like a literal fruit leather. And I don't know what you use it for, but you could. And, you know, just making like synthetic, but still natural, like fibers that mimic silk, like really strong silks and things like that. It's a wild what people have been doing for thousands of years, and then what people are now doing in like labs across the world. It's a great project. So all that to say, we had a particularly special project in Morocco this year, which of course, unfortunately, is at the top of the news feed, you know, due to the tragic earthquakes. But we were able to base out of Tangier, I guess it was beginning of June, yeah, with a carpet designer there. Her name's Nina Mohammed. She's fantastic. And so are her two daughters. And we spent a lot of time with them, about 2 weeks. And so we started in Tangier, and then we drove down in a party bus filled with 10 women from, you know, around the world who had all these interesting specializations. So we had Leslie, who is the textile specialist, and she also specializes in natural dyes. We had our two Nat Geo people, the marine biologist and the anthropologist. We had two microbiologists, which was really interesting. And we had the designer, and we had me. We had somebody who makes building materials like bricks out of microbes. I don't know. It just goes over my head, but I'm impressed. So we had all these people on a bus together, driving down, but up into the Middle Atlas Mountains. And our whole project there was to, one, work with weavers at this cooperation in the Atlas Mountains called I.Dynamic Cooperation. And it's a group of about 10 women who founded a weaving studio in 1970. And they've been running it themselves. You know, they've been doing all the design work. They've been doing all of the selling. Typically in Morocco, women will work for a man like who distributes and then doesn't give them much pay cut. So they do all of this themselves. So that way they're kind of very solvent, maybe the word I want. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, they're wonderful women. They were so welcoming and having us, and we had Moroccan mint tea every day, and they would make us tagines, and oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, we were working with them to kind of reinvigorate the market or the interest in natural Moroccan rugs because they're so sought after worldwide. But more importantly, actual dyes in Moroccan rugs. So, as with many industries and areas in the world, a lot of people have been switching to synthetic dyes because they're much cheaper to source and they're a lot easier to use, but they're also way more toxic. And the people who are making these rugs and like dyeing the yarns typically are doing it like on their rooftops. And it's literally like seeping down into their homes because their homes are made of like natural things like bricks and wood and things like that are porous that would absorb these toxins. So there are people getting sick from dyeing these rugs, and so they're trying to kind of reinvigorate this market for natural fibers and dyes, which was really fascinating. Oh, and then real quickly, the microbiologist of it all. These two women, Anne Madden and Brooke Jude, they specialize in extracting dyes from microbes. So it's natural, but it's very new technology. And we were assured many, many times that you cannot get sick from microbes. So they weren't doing anything shifty with these potential dyes. But yeah, we were there they were there expressly to see if they could find microbes there in Morocco that would grow pigments like in petri dishes that could then be converted into a natural dye.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the project, you know, obviously with a kind of a growing market and you know kind of mission that this group is on, how did the project kind of fit in with this whole part? You know, obviously you said it was a portrait project. When you got there, like, were there certain like plans of like how you wanted to kind of document this so that it would bring more attention to all the work that they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. My main intention was to include the main team members, kind of go through because this was a large project with a lot of moving parts. Usually it's a lot more linear, you know, we're there to cover one story, one aspect of it. But, you know, we had weavers, we had designers, we had experts, we had market people, we had the scientists. So it was just a lot of moving parts. So it worked out perfectly for the portrait project because I was able to kind of showcase the entire wheel of it by, you know, pulling in, you know, the different specialists and kind of show the whole picture, which was a lot of fun there in Morocco.
Nice. So from an equipment perspective, obviously we know the G9 Mark II was the camera that you used. But aside from that, like what did your kit look like, you know, to go for a project like this with what you had in mind you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah. I mean, usually, of course, if I'm using full frame, that's much different. A whole other beast because everything's so much bigger. But what's fantastic about being able to concentrate only on the G9 Mark II was, I think I took 4 lenses, might be even more than I took, but I took a couple like low light primes, and then two like typical zooms. I did the 12 to 60. What is that? A 4.1?
Oh, the Leica one, the 2.8 to f4. Yeah.
I always forget. And then I took a big zoom. I don't know what it was. It was the 100 to 400? No, 50 to 300. I'm just saying numbers now. I know what it is.
The 35 to 100, was that the one, I believe?
No, I did have one of those. Gosh, Sean, I don't remember. All I know is what I took worked great. No, you're right. 35 to 100 was definitely a part of it, and some other thing. But what I can say, and then it just kind of hammers back the point of like how easy the G9 Mark II is to work with. It's just you don't have that panic moment of oh crap, what am I going to do? How am I going to capture this? It's just all so intuitive and it just works great. But yeah, so a pretty minimal kit. We were bouncing around from like tiny village to up the mountains to go see the monkeys, to go to forage some, natural dye things like green oak bark and poppy seeds. I don't know. So having a really light small kit was really great, and the G9 Mark II was perfect.
Nice.
I did program my S5 Mark II. I love her. She's beefy.
Yeah, I mean, I said on last week's recorded stream, when it comes to traveling, whether that's for casual, kind of just, personal enjoyment, or whether it's for like an assignment and work related, I think we're very comfortably now in a period where, you actually can make a conscious decision to say, look, Micro Four Thirds as a platform, as our crop sensor platform, it has a ton of those benefits for the size, the weight, what options you can bring with you if you're given a, kind of somewhat strict, kind of weight requirement on equipment. How did you feel moving back and forth between, shooting with like the full frame cameras to going into the Micro Four Thirds, into the G9 Mark II? Did you have any or see any kind of like challenges between the two?
Not especially. I'm very comfortable with both lines, so it's not something, luckily, that I had to think a lot about on location. That's one thing I'll recommend, is get to know your camera system before you go out and shop.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh my God. Even still, there's a couple of new bells and whistles that we might chat about later on the G9 Mark II that I haven't gotten to play with much yet, and I struggled with, but I could completely see the benefit. I just have to learn it a little better. And I'm talking about the, what's it called? The, the preset thing that I can't remember the name of.
Oh, the real-time LUT?
That's the one.
Yeah, that one.
Struggled with that one, but I'll learn it.
No, that's what I think is kind of cool though about a lot of, the modern setup of cameras that we have. Like you've said it a couple of times, I think so far, that like, a lot of the bells and whistles that we put into these cameras, a lot of the new features and functions and stuff like that, they're all awesome. They're all really cool to have, but making the decision on a camera that you're comfortable with, that has an easy to use kind of ergonomics to it, that it just kind of feels comfortable when you start shooting with it. I think that's one of those things that a lot of us kind of maybe tend to overlook a little bit these days, because we get kind of blinded by spec lists. And I know for those watching the stream, I know that I don't necessarily help with that mentality, because I always love talking about all the newest, flashiest tech that we have in these cameras.
But at the end of the day, you gotta do your job.
Yeah. And
That's that's how I have to think about it. Otherwise, I too could totally get lost in the, oh, but it does this and this, but this one does this and this.
so, going on with that about like the day to day kind of work and the project that you've done. There was a question that actually just that came in a little bit before. It was from Doug, and it says, so if like product photography is something that you have as a core, competency in the crazy world of photography. Doug's asking what would your favorite macro lenses for work be, and I guess by extension, do you use macro lenses for your product photography?
I don't particularly. I do have the I have to look at it. Really, I should know my lenses by the back of my hand, but I don't. The 70 to 300 that I use with my S5 Mark II.
Hmm.
Um, it has a bit of a macro capability there at the water
Yeah.
mat, which is, it works all right. It works great. I mean, I don't put it to the test very often, but a lot of the product that I do, it depends. That's a good question. I'm thinking about it. Um, yeah, I don't get to dabble. I can dabble a bit with macro photography and product, but it's more, or like the macro aspect of, with lenses and things. But I typically use like a very long zoom,
Hmm.
just to get things to be as rectilinear as possible.
Yeah.
For the Mac you get, everything, the more rectilinear it's going to be. Um, so yeah, I don't get to play with them too much. I should, though. I should.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I've always been kind of surprised because the more photographers I talk to that do specialize in like product photography, stuff like that, I find that, I guess, counter to I guess what a lot of people would expect, dedicated macro lenses don't seem to be as, I don't want to say popular, but or
yeah.
as widely used because,
Like,
well,
you
yeah.
can do really cool niche things with macro, but like those are going to be more creative shots, which I love. That's like my favorite part of um, product photography. But a lot of what I do is not very sexy. It's like ecom.
Hey, I
Yeah.
mean, it's it's kind of like pulling that curtain back on some of
Yeah.
this, right? It's like all of us love the pretty, flashy, the artsy, style of
That's what
photography, especially when we see it.
drives me. But the bulk of it is just, it's the ho hum of your everyday kind of ecom.
So when working on say like after like a project for kind of the ecom style product photography, what kind of stuff do you do that keeps you, I don't want to say sane, because
Yeah.
you know what I mean, like what's the stuff that you do that kind of gets you out of that day in day out mentality with photography?
Yeah. I really like to, it doesn't always work out, but I like to pursue brands that kind of let me have a lot more creative freedom.
Mm.
Um, and the reason, well, there's many reasons that I kind of target the beauty skincare space is they, as a, well, I mean, a lot of industries have the same thing, but they just have to churn out images like this to keep interest because it's crazy competitive right now.
Oh
Like
yeah.
skincare and beauty is like, oh, they're growing $1 billion over $1 billion every year. It's wild the amount of money spent there, and they just have to keep everybody's attention. They're throwing out new brands, new celebrities are coming out with brands, so it's not a bad market to work in terms of work, which is nice. But yeah, if you're finding a brand that's really likes to explore a little bit and they're willing to kind of let go of the reins. I really like to work with like extra wide lenses, like for my
Hmm.
more creative stuff. I find that to be a lot more interesting and fun and give a different aspect to your images that a lot of photography brands, or not photography, brands, but like, you know, skincare brands, any kind of product photography, like you don't really see too much. And just playing with weird colors and getting weird. That's what I like to do when I'm allowed. The complete opposite of like on white paper ecom that I do most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, like so in the chat, I dropped a link to your website, and we'll link to the Instagram account too, because I think it's so cool to see, like, you know, having the core competencies of how to do solid, you know, traditional product photography, like the ecom stuff, like you said, like white paper, backdrop, simple, straightforward.
Reflective surfaces, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
it's like that kind of stuff. I think anyone that can master that, or get to a really comfortable position in how to do that, you just see by extension how good the creative side gets, because you know how light falls, you know how, you know, to actually shape an image, how to frame things up the way you want. And I would also argue that also makes, like, a lot of the stuff that you do outside of that way more like visually captivating than what you see from like someone who may just only focus in fashion, or the kind of like the higher color contrast kind of work, because
Yeah.
it gives you that, at least in my opinion, a better appreciation of how to work with color, because you already know all the basics of how to work with light. It all just kind of like blends and gives you a little bit leg up in that other side.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've been having, over the last year and a half, a hard time finding where the meeting point is between the two things that I do, other than, you know, I use a camera to do both. And, you know, and it's really helped out my product side too, and like fashion, whatever, is doing the documentary stuff, because, and I found that my meeting point is storytelling. And so often in product photography, don't have a lot of opportunity to tell a story, especially like ecom images. Okay, here it is from the front and the side. That's the story. But yeah, just having that more like storytelling mindset when you're getting into product and into fashion makes a project feel so much more interesting and more complete at the end of the day, and it's a lot more fulfilling, I found too. And so kind of being able to like marry both sides together and have them make sense in my brain, at least, to where they're different, but they're on the same spectrum of work. That makes sense. Has been a huge light bulb for me. It's very nice. But yeah, it's fun being able to swing back and forth and, you know, take little tidbits each way, you know, with me. Which is fun. Like part of the project for the portrait, well, so I was in Morocco for two reasons. I did the portrait project for the LUMIX, or for the G9II, and then I was also documenting in general for, you know, the whole project as a whole. So I did have my S5 Mark II on me there, because they were wanting to blow up some stuff pretty big for like future exhibitions. And then I also used it as my video camera for behind the scenes for whatever. But anywho, and so I did actually bring a lot of my product aspect into it, which is a lot of fun. I was creating little scenes with things that were found there in Morocco to help tell a story about a rug or a fabric, or some of the materials used for like natural dyes, like your green oak bark and your pomegranate leaves and whatever else they use for natural dyes there, and to help just kind of curate little stories within a photo that kind of help tell you where they're from, where we're at when we're trying to dye, and like a little bit of the process all within one photo. And it's still true to where you're at and what you're trying to capture. I think a lot of times in photojournalism, it's all about capturing the moment, but you're not a part of it.
Yeah.
Kind of remove yourself from it, which is totally part of it, but two, also being able to create little pullback stories and like, this is what we were here for. Here it is in one photo, is kind of a nice thing to have.
Yeah. It's that's I think a side that a lot of people may not really ever kind of witness that often, because like you said, in journalistic style photography, unless you've got the background of doing the kind of the pullback from that, if you're out on assignment and your job is to just cover X, Y, and Z, and that's what you do, you cover X, Y, and Z, seeing the threads of everything else that goes on with it, I think is something that it does take someone of multiple disciplines to be able to kind of figure out how to do that, and how to make it look right too. You said something interesting here, to bring this back to a product side of my question is, so on this trip you had both the Mark II and the other Mark II, both of the new Mark IIs. So I realize I actually can't just say Mark II now, because no one will really know exactly which one I'm talking about. So with having both of the systems there with you, how was the interplay, kind of jumping back and forth between them? Because I know that there's been a lot of people that question, why did we make the changes to the G9's body that we made for the G9 Mark II? And as I've said on the streams before, part of this is to kind of help facilitate that interplay between multiple different cameras within our lineup. So I'm curious how your experience was with that out in the field.
It was seamless. Like, it's so much to the point where I didn't even think about it until you just asked me. Yeah, and I hadn't played around in the Micro Four Thirds space in a while. I had very much so gotten into my routine with the S5 Mark II, and that's just what I went for. It's what had all my settings correct that I needed for the next job, and I would just pack it up and go. And so being able to jump right into the G9 Mark II was, like, again, without thought, other than, putting in your personal preferences. But I cannot have the touchscreen on. On any camera I use, it drives me crazy. Because inevitably, I will mess up the focus on the one shot that I need. So anyway, I turn that off. And the joystick, I can't. They're great functions, but I can't use them. But anyway, so yeah, just being able to hop between each camera, was great. And the other thing too I didn't even mention was I had two assistants with me, and they were teenagers, and they were the just most fabulous girls, Maymuna and Alima. They were the daughters of our host for the trip, and they're based there in Morocco. And I actually gave them the camera a lot of the time. I said, hey, I need background or BTS kind of footage for Lumix. Would you mind, getting a little bit if something interesting is happening, just using this and stuff like that. It's great. It's such an easy camera to use. Any of the Lumix cameras, but yeah, it's. I love them. I don't know what else to tell you. They're great.
So, so we're about at the time for this segment on the stream. Thank you so much, Jamie, for spending some time and chatting with us. I put a bunch of the links into the chat here for everyone to read about the project that you shot, to check out your work on your website as well as on Instagram. But outside of that, what kind of stuff do you got coming up? Is there any kind of cool projects you want to kind of give a shout out to? And at the end of that, where can everyone, kind of follow you and keep up to date with what you're doing?
Yeah. In terms of projects, we are slow rolling out kind of the footage, all the content. There's so much content. We were there for 2 weeks. It's a lot to comb through. So slowly rolling out like all the things we found there in Morocco. We did a similar trip, shorter, but similar trip in Scotland just in August, and then we'll also be rolling out that footage as well. So you can find all of that on Instagram. I'm trying really, really hard to get back into the into the routine of posting, and not having it feel like getting teeth pulled out, you know. But once you get off the horse, it's hard to get back down. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll be trying to update Instagram with the Scotland project as well as the Morocco project, more of that. With some potential future things that maybe we'll talk about soon, but I can't talk about right now. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's the at Jamie_House. Um, and then website's just Jamie House Photo. For Around the World in 80 Fabrics, it's AWBw. I can't remember if it's F or if it's fabrics, but one of those will get you there. I can't remember which one.com. Yeah, and you can find out all about what they're doing over there. It's fantastic work. The people that it's wild. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat for Around the World. So if anyone is interested in keeping up to date or seeing more about the project and the organization that Jamie was photographing, feel free to take a look at the links that we dropped in the chat there. But yeah, Jamie, thank you again so much for spending time with us, for sharing some of the insight with us. I look forward to having you back on in the future with maybe some other cool projects that you might be working on. And yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, guys. That was fun.
Cool. Thanks again, Jamie.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining for the first part for the interview with Jamie. There's been obviously a lot being able to take the camera out into the field, and you know, I'm working on trying to do a little bit more of a series coming up with other photographers and videographers that have had this early hands-on time with the camera. And while a lot of the conversations we do here on Lumix Live tend to be very technical oriented, you know, digging deep into the questions and the technical sides of the cameras, I think it's important that every once in a while, you know, we take a step back. While yes, you know, the G9 Mark II was used on that project, there are a lot of the sides I think that we kind of forget about as photographers, videographers, wedding event portrait photographers, videographers, you name it. But it's usually all about story and what you want to, you know, kind of do with the cameras that you have on hand. So yeah, we're super excited to have Jamie as part of the project for the launch of the G9 Mark II. I think her images, if you take a look at the links, the first link that we dropped in the chat there is our kind of article that we wrote up about Jamie. There's some example photos there from her time with the camera in Morocco. And then, yeah, just take a look at a lot of her other work. She's done a lot of work with the Lumix cameras over the time that we've been working together. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. If you don't already, go follow her. She's awesome photographer, great work. But that also moves us into this second portion of the live stream today. So I can take my headphones off now. And that is actually just continuing to answer questions. So we're gonna take that shift from the inspirational side, and now let's kind of dig into a little bit more of the Q&A and the tech side of these the G9 Mark II, and really honestly any other questions that you have. So going back up in the chat here, I have a question here. It says, can the rubber grip be replaced on a GH5 as mine has gone sticky and starting to fail? Yeah, so if you reach out to Lumix Services, Lumix Pro Services is probably the best program to do it through. You can get your camera sent in and have it serviced. Obviously, if you do it that way, there will be a typical service charge for that kind of thing. Over time, those are things that aren't warranty covered, especially, you know, depending on the age of the camera, that kind of thing. But yeah, you can take a look. I recommend that you look at the Lumix Pro Services program, get yourself on the red tier at least, because that is an easy portal to get any kind of service or support that you may need. Let's see here. Ruckus, welcome back, says, in the S-Series white balance menu, what does AWBc and AWBw stand for? These are great questions. AWB in all of our cameras is auto white balance. Pretty basic, simple, straightforward there. But a number of cameras ago, we introduced a C and a W variant of auto white balance. And truthfully, all these is a cooler bias or a warmer bias. There are many users that like to come from various different platforms where a camera manufacturer's white balance tends to be warmer or cooler. We tend to pride ourselves on the fact that our basic out-of-the-box auto white balance is fairly neutral. But adding in a cool or a warm version of it just allows you to kind of bias your color temperatures with the auto white balance. So if you shoot in any of those particular modes and then bring it into something like Lightroom or Photoshop or Silky Pix, if you have to use that version of the editing, you will notice that AWBc and W are not found in there. There's just the auto white balance or as shot. So it's mainly because they're more scene dependent as to where the warm or the cool is going to be tweaked on that. So let's see here. I don't know if this is really a question. It says it has new sensor with PDAF 779 point or PDAF. Yeah, so G9 Mark II, totally new sensor, totally new hardware design, software design. 779 AF PDAF autofocus points are what we use in the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, as well as in the G9 Mark II now. So you're getting a really wide coverage across pretty much the entire frame to get you all of those points, which then, kind of feeds the DFD system, feeds the subject detection algorithms, tells the system where to focus. So yeah, you get more coverage, but also a good balance so that you're not devoting too many pixels to PDAF because they have to be masked out in the imaging process. So it's a pretty good balance to get really fast performance, especially once you actually tune the system to what it is that you're trying to photograph, versus just, kind of going ham with thousands and thousands of pixels that you then have to lose image quality from. Let's see here. How do you compare autofocus performance on G9 Mark II with S5 Mark II? Some reviewers said the G9 Mark II may be struggling with autofocus in the dark or pairing with certain lenses, old LUMIX lenses. So I haven't seen many of those reports of anyone really kind of stating that the G9 Mark II struggles in low light. The system actually with the G9 Mark II, I just got back from spending time in Seattle with the camera, where it was very overcast, very, rainy and kind of real, just generally crappy out. A lot of it can come down to what lenses you want to shoot with. Fast aperture lenses on any PDAF system are going to typically perform a little bit better because your maximum aperture is letting more light in. PDAF needs light. Most cameras, if you did not know this already, but most cameras, when you go to really high ISOs or you go to really dark scenarios, convert themselves back to contrast detect in very low light scenarios. This is an industry thing. This is not just a LUMIX thing. So depending on what lenses you're using, if you're stopping down to f22, almost all PDAF systems are going to struggle in a case like that because you're choking off as much light as you can. My experiences with the G9 Mark II and the S5 Mark II, now obviously, as you all know, I have inherent bias because I work for the company. I feel that the G9 Mark II is actually a step ahead of the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX. But a lot of that, I believe, comes down more to the subject detection algorithms that we have in it and the added benefit that the micro four thirds or the 4/3 sensor can read out much faster. As we said, the sensor that's in the G9 Mark II, while I can't give you details as to exactly what kind of technology is used in this sensor, I can tell you that it's not a stacked sensor. I can tell you that much. Stacked introduces some dynamic range problems that we avoid by not using a stacked sensor. But as far as the other technology that a lot of people like to kind of throw around as to whether or not a sensor is or isn't that, it uses very modern wiring layout for what you would assume on a modern sensor. So that, in combination with the new algorithms, the derived engine from the S5 Mark II, make it, you know, a generational improvement over the S5 Mark II. And something to remember too is that a lot of times you'll see this with cameras as they come out. S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX were the first ones that we launched PDAF in. We've already pushed a couple of minor little firmware updates, you know, for camera updates, camera, you know, kind of control updates, things like that. But when the G9 Mark II came out, that has a lot of the kind of work that we've been doing in the background, taking the feedback from what all of you have been telling us on S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, applying what we can into the newer system. Does that mean that there's a guarantee that these updates can come to the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX? I cannot make those guarantees, but there's a lot of cool stuff that we do within both of these systems, which is why we love to have both of these series, you know, in our existing lineup, because we can push certain aspects in different areas. And if you've been around with Lumix long enough, you know that if we can make things work across the board, we will always try to make things work across the board firmware-wise. There are times where hardware is the difference between why something can be done on one camera and it can't be done on another, and that can come down to processor-wise as well. There was another comment that came down a little bit further down in the chat that was actually asking about the monochrome color profile from 00 Silverwings. Give us the LEICA Monochrome color profile on the S5 IIX, also on the original G9 if possible. The truth is that if we are able to bring certain things like that, like the color profile, your most likely cameras that could get that profile would be a Mark II and the Mark IIX on the S5 platform. The original G9, unfortunately, you're probably not going to see many, if any, of these upgrades come to that camera, mainly because we are on such a different hardware platform now with the new engines that we're running. There comes a time where you basically, with what you're doing, you don't have the resources to do it on the old engine. What I mean by resources is the engine itself doesn't have the resources to do a lot of the newer stuff that we're doing. So things like real-time LUT, the autofocus improvements that we've made, because those are hardware derived, and then some of the new color processing and the engine changes, like a monochrome, those are built on the new engine. They're not built on the previous engines that we used. So again, can't make guarantees or promises that you would see some stuff like that on an S5 Mark II or Mark IIX, but if we were able to do those things, they would be the logical cameras that you would see those kinds of updates come to, if at all possible. Let's see here. I think it's Martin says, hi from London. Your S5 IIX arrived today with the 50mm, 85mm, along with the 20 to 60mm kit. That is awesome. Excited to see. I love my S5 IIX. In fact, I have my S5 IIX here, just sitting on the table, and then my G9 Mark II, the one that I took to Seattle with me here. So, yeah, super fun cameras to work with. Let's hear. Doug says, is there any chance that the LUMIX Sync app will support saving images to a location other than the phone's photo app, i.e. Google Drive or Dropbox? We used to do storage to Google Drive and Dropbox and some of those others. At least here in the United States, we discontinued that service. I don't know the exact reasons why, but I believed it had something to do with the fact that we can't guarantee what Google or Dropbox or any of those companies are going to do with that footage if you decide to, you know, leave the service, or if they change their API or any of that stuff. So at the moment, if you're someone who uses Google Drive or Dropbox, or if you're like an iOS or an Android user, what I do, because on my Android device, all of my images are stored in the LUMIX Sync folder when I transfer them from the camera to the phone. I have that folder just flagged to auto backup to my Drive account, and that basically does the same thing. Once they're stored and saved in my online Drive account, which, to be fair, if you want to do the full high-res versions and you want to do RAW files, then you have to pay for the storage space. When I do it that way, basically at the end of every week or end of every month, depending on how much I'm traveling or using the cameras, then I'll just delete local storage on it when I confirm that it's actually up in the cloud. That seems to be the most direct workaround for things like that, and I believe you can do the same thing with Dropbox. I don't have a ton of experience with Dropbox personally, though. Let's see here. Do we have any update on compatibility with Speedboosters and on the autofocus performance? Thanks for these interesting live streams. So there is no update on from Lumix's side. You will not get an update from us on whether or not Speedboosters or third-party adapters will be supporting autofocus or anything like that. The reason being is that we do not have any controlling interest or any involvement with what those companies are doing. They are totally on their own. They make up their own stuff. If they were to be part of the Micro Four Thirds consortium, that could be a different story, but that's so far above my pay grade that I don't know if it would even work that way. So as far as Speedbooster compatibility, the only people that are going to be able to give you any kind of answers are going to be the companies that are making those adapters. I don't even have one that I can test with. Honestly, I've never needed one before. So unfortunately, I wish I had a better answer for you, but to be clear, those are things that you will not get an answer from anyone in the Lumix team about, because we have nothing to do with what those companies are doing to make their compatibility. Yeah, so sorry. Let's see here. Fridge says, focal length entry is required for manual lenses. How is this done for zoom lenses? Thank you. So zoom lenses are a little more complicated. Typically with a zoom lens, what I recommend is know where you're going to be using that lens. If you know that you're using a zoom lens and it's going to be much more telephoto, set your the focal length entry for the telephoto side of the lens. What that entry is doing is tuning the stabilization system based on the field of view that you are telling the camera this lens is capable of. That obviously causes some challenge if you decide to zoom the lens or change field of view or focus field of view. If you know that you're going to be changing it a lot, there really isn't a clear, easy way to do that, because those lenses aren't telling the camera what the field of view is. So if you needed to, I've done it in the past where I set it kind of in the middle for the focal length that it is. But just also remember that means that in the metadata, if it is copying that metadata over, it's only going to tell you what focal length you programmed into it. So yeah, just kind of keep that in mind. Not the greatest, but a lot of the zoom lenses, for the vast majority of zoom lenses, you have some sort of electrical communication. Any of the manual ones, that's just kind of what you're stuck with because you're using the older non-electronic lenses. Beep Beep says, when do they ship? In the United States, they should start shipping in the first or second week of November. Should be before Black Friday. Assuming everything goes fine in global shipping and transit. All of that fun stuff that, always kind of becomes a problem as you get into the holidays. Let's see here. Question about the i.Dynamic range on the G9 Mark II. Is it different from the older models? No. i.Dynamic, which is the JPEG-focused kind of, how to describe it? It's really designed to just change the tone curve to kind of try to get you more quote-unquote dynamic range. It's not really actually getting you more dynamic range. It's just adjusting a tone curve like you would in the computer. But i.Dynamic, you have the same auto, high, standard, and low for your selections. So that's going to be pretty much the same as all the modern cameras that we've had over the last couple of years. So you shouldn't really see any difference there, Yannick. Using the G9, should I get to upgrade? Which of my lenses will need a firmware update? I have the 100 to 400, 12 to 60, Leica 8 to 18, 45 to 200, 42 to 517, 21.4. So if you're gonna plan to upgrade, Tim, for the G9 Mark II, the only lens I think that has an update currently would be the 100 to 400. The new version that has just been released, that's going to ship with the required firmware on it. Outside of that, I don't believe there's a firmware update needed for any of the other lenses at this time. But what we do typically is, as we get closer to when we're ready to have additional firmware updates, obviously we'll talk about them here. We announce them on our social media platforms. So LUMIX USA or any of the other US accounts, you'll get an update if we're going to have firmware updates for those. You can always just periodically check the website, our global service support page. That can always just get you some clear info as to what the firmware levels are for each of these lenses. Some of the lenses, like the 45 to 200, the 25 1.4, the Summilux lens, you just want to make sure you're looking at the right version of the lens on our firmware download site. On the back of your lens, see if I can show it on this one. Yeah, I should be able to show it on this one. So on the back of the lens here, move that out of the highlight there. The back of the lens here will be the model number of it. So like this is the new 12 to 35, the Leica version. So this is an H-ES 12035. There's an HSA version, an HS version. Just make sure that those numbers match up, and that'll tell you. If you don't see the lens up there, it means there is no firmware update for it. So, let's see here. Free agent, is there any supply issue on S5 IIX in Canada? My order was placed in the beginning of September, and the dealer still don't have an ETA from Panasonic when it will be delivered. The only thing I can think of is, I mean, there's not a supply issue other than the fact that we just can't keep them in stock. As we get them delivered to the dealers that are ordering them, and selling them, they're coming in and going out. So, at least here in the US, I can't necessarily speak for any of our Canadian dealers, but in the US, when we get them in, they're pretty much gone out. So we should be getting more inventory to hopefully help fill some of those back orders pretty soon. But the camera's been a lot more popular than I think a lot of dealers also anticipated out of the gate, given it's the first and it's a little bit more of a special edition version of the camera. So as we're getting them in, we're getting those orders out to as many of the dealers as we can that have orders for them, so y'all can get them in your hands. It's kind of the same if you haven't done already. The G9 Mark II is looking to be about the same. Now that the camera's actually, like, reviews have been out, and kind of that initial, like, kind of craziness that happens at the launch has kind of like died down a little bit. We're looking at a very promising launch with the G9 Mark II. So if you are considering getting one and you want to be one of the early ones to get one, make sure you get a pre-order in. Various different dealers, locations, wherever you are in the world, are running various different promotions, for pre-ordering, things like that. So if you are looking to get one, get an order in early. Ensure that you can try to get one as early as possible. Otherwise, you may be facing some of the same challenges as the S5 II or the 2X. Let's see here. Victor, hi, can you tell me if the G9 Mark II, if the phase and subject detection fully works in slow motion video as well? If not, where is the cutoff point exactly from? So PDAF works in all of the focus modes that have continuous focus functionality. What changes depends on the frame rate that you're at. So if you go to, and I have my camera right here, so I just want to confirm and make sure I give you the right information here. So if I set the camera up to 4K 120, so let's set this to 4K 120. 4K 120, you have full PDAF autofocus for continuous. Everything works normally on that front. What changes is that when you go to 120 frames per second, your subject detection is disabled at that point. Priority is given to the recording frames as well as the speed of the autofocus. So at that point, if you need subject detection, that's the only thing that is different when you go to 120 frames per second. But you are still getting continuous tracking autofocus. Everything works as you'd expect. When you go to up to 240 frames per second, so let me change my camera to 240. So when I go to 240 frames per second, 240 frames per second has the push focus in this particular setup. So when you hit 240 frames per second, this is where you would use something like back button focus or trigger your focus here. A little bit more similar to like what you'd see in some of the more cinema video oriented cameras. Whereas you start to go up higher end, you're having to do push AF. So you have autofocus, just not continuous autofocus at 240. And then when you go to 300 frames per second, it's manual focus. So hopefully that helps. But it is phase detect in 4K 120. It's phase detect across the board in all of the other AF options below 120 frames per second. Yeah, doesn't matter what frame rate, resolution, combination you're using at 120 frames per second or below. Let's see here. Animal. Is the flash sync speed or exposure time influenced by the DR boost? No. DR boost is separate, so flash sync speed and exposure time is independent of that. Dynamic range boost on the G9 Mark II as well as the GH6, which also uses a version of DR boost. Those systems work up to 60 frames per second, so it's more of a how fast of a frame per second are you shooting at. When you hit 61 frames or faster for burst stills capture, that's where that system turns off. And that's just because of the succession of images that you're capturing. From an exposure time perspective or flash sync speed, DR boost, as far as flash sync speed, isn't influenced. Exposure time, with all but one caveat being that long exposure work does not utilize dynamic range boost. That's the only case where you really kind of see that there's a difference there as far as exactly just an exposure time being an influence on it. Let's see here. So a bunch more questions come in here. David says, a total solar eclipse is heading for Austin in April 2024. Seems like a great opportunity to show off the 100 to 400. Do you have any plans or tutorials or even an in-person event? Could be pretty cool to do that. I have very lightly been following the total solar eclipse. If it is, when I can actually have time to really kind of dig down and, look at what's going on, kind of plan something out, maybe I'll try to do something in person. Or maybe I'll try to live stream from it. Depends on the timing. But yeah, we'll kind of try to get through that. Yeah. Chris says, I can't get 4K 120 over HDMI out of the GH6. I got it in RAW, but not in non-RAW using Ninja 5 Plus. Okay. So Chris, this is one of the things that I think a lot of people misunderstood about the update for 4K 120 over HDMI. There are no recorders that support 4K 120 frames per second as a video feed yet. The Ninja 5 Plus can do it in raw data video, but it does not do it as a video feed signal. So if you want to do 4K 120 over HDMI on the GH6, it's to a display, not to a recorder. That's kind of just where the recorder side is. I have asked as to, when we're going to see recorders do it as a native video resolution for recording and frame rate, but haven't gotten any answers from that side yet. Let's see here. Martin, are the algorithms baked in at manufacturing or updated in firmware? I assume that you're referencing the autofocus algorithms. Autofocus algorithms for subject detection can be programmed over firmware. A lot of it just depends on what the hardware is capable of doing process-wise, as to whether or not you would see things have, kind of things added in, whether or not they can do it. But yeah, it's PDAF is hardware manufactured. Contrast, subject detection, things like that, that's all software. Animal Informant, the hybrid shooter explicitly states that it does not use a BSI sensor. I can neither confirm or deny that maybe the hybrid shooter is incorrect in this matter. I can't say it, but more likely than not, he's incorrect. Let's see here. Using USB-C to PD power, do they power the battery on a LUMIX camera? If the plug is disconnected or power ends, does the camera save video to avoid corruption? Cons for internal battery. So powering a LUMIX camera over USB-C with PD power, the way the system works, and this is why you have to have a battery installed in the camera, is it is running power through to the battery to charge the battery up. And then when the battery is fully charged, it runs basically through the battery and then powers the camera. If that cable gets pulled out in the middle of a recording, seamlessly runs to the camera's battery. It will not drop the footage there. However, if there is a problem, if you are using a third-party battery that does not make the handshake, that does not transfer power properly. There's 1,000,001 reasons why we don't recommend using third-party batteries. However, we are not going to block you from using them. We just warn you, don't use them, because if they fail in your camera and they cause a problem with your camera, that's not a warranted covered failure. But if something were to happen power-wise, where power gets unexpectedly cut from the camera because of any number of things, and an MDT file is created or a corrupt video file is created, the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X do have, and now the GH6, do have a built-in ability to repair MDT files. So if it does happen to you, if you are using a third-party battery and for some reason you get a power cut and you get a file that can't be read, put it in the camera. You do have the option in the playback menu for the camera. So here, I got time for a couple more questions, and then I have to end the stream today, actually. Does the G9 Mark II support timecode through the flash port like the GH5S? No, because it does not have a PC Sync flash port. Eric, would there be a possibility of a kit deal for the G9 Mark II and the 100 to 400 Mark II? I think that's going to depend on the dealer, but I can check and see with, at least on the US team. I can't speak for other regions, but yeah, we can take a look. Sigma announced a 10 to 18 lens in L-mount. Would that lens be compatible with LUMIX full-frame cameras? Yes, it will be. The beauty of the L-mount system, and I guess this is true for most cameras across sports. Maybe it's not a beauty of the L-mount system. It's a common expected function of full-frame cameras. If you were to put an APS-C version of the lens for that mount on the camera is communicating with that lens. It knows what the field of view is. It knows what the correction data should be. So it will put the camera into that mode for that. So if you've got an S5 2X or an S5 II or any of those other cameras, yeah, that new Sigma lens is going to work fine on it. So let's see here. GH5 Mark II does a few built-in live streaming things. I thought you might include those in the G9 Mark II. Yeah, the G9 Mark II, I think, Charbax, to remember, we've had this conversation before. Even in person, I think you and I have had this conversation. The G9 platform is a photographer's first camera. So photography is what it was designed for. video is built into this camera from a photographer's perspective. I know that sounds a little rich coming from the company that built a camera that's got like ProRes in a photographer's camera. However, things like live streaming do have hardware requirements that, you know, if we were to do that, the price would go up on the camera. Maybe the size would have to change a little bit. So at this current point, it was not part of the plan for the G9 Mark II. If you need the live streaming, if you need that much heavier video side use cases for the camera, that's where you would go with a GH5 Mark II. That's where you'd go with an S5 Mark II X for things like that. So, yeah. Let's see. Whoa. Thank you, YouTube. Still interested in buffer clearing speed. We know that it takes about 60 seconds to move photos from buffer to SD card. For USB, it's about 45. So where's the bottleneck? I do not have an answer for you. I've checked, I've asked, honestly not sure. Let's see here. I got time for 3 more questions, and then I will end up having to call the stream because I got some other stuff I got to do today too. John Smith says, hi there. Will LEICA Monochrome profile be exclusive for G9 Mark II, or is there a chance it will appear in S5 2X? If not, it's totally understandable. I addressed this a little bit ago in the stream. Might have been, it was probably before you jumped on, but there are no promises that we can or will bring everything that's in the G9 Mark II to cameras like the S5 Mark II or the Mark IIX. What I can say is that the most likely cameras that could possibly get the same capabilities or very similar capabilities that we've done in the G9 Mark II would be the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX. Whether or not that means that they're going to come, that I can't answer. At this point, you know, if you need those particular things, the G9 Mark II is the one that's got it for right now. A lot of development is done in parallel with each other, and it kind of depends on when cameras come out and whether or not the camera has the hardware support to be able to do it. If there are any hardware changes between, you know, the engine that we're using in the G9 Mark II, which is a derivative of what we're doing in the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX. A lot of that, it just kind of, as new cameras come out, you'll see that there's always some sort of like leapfrogging that happens. Just because they're newer in the development phase. Things are started earlier on a newer product that couldn't have started with the older products because we didn't know that they existed. So, JC, thanks for explaining about PD power and how it works and MDT files autofix from the new LUMIX cameras. You're welcome, JC. Chris says, thanks for explaining 4K 120 over HDMI. What's the barrel size of the DC port for the BS1H? Can't find the info online. Ooh. I used to know that one off the top of my head. I am blanking. There's a specific name for what that barrel connector is. I cannot remember it off the top of my head. I will try to dig through and find what that is. Yeah. Sorry, Chris. I wish I had that answer off the top of my head, but unfortunately I don't. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. Again, thank you, Jamie, for joining us on the stream. Thank you, everybody that tuned in for that part of the broadcast as well. We will be back live again next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be continuing our conversations on G9 Mark II, on the interplay with our S-Series cameras. So be sure to get subscribed. If you liked the content that you got today on the stream, give us a like. It helps us out tremendously. If you know of other people that may be interested in some of the conversations that we have on LUMIX Live, let other people know. It's awesome. The more that we as a community can kind of bring more people to this, obviously I do everything I can, but word of mouth I still think is one of the coolest, best ways to get people engaged and having a good time. If you know anybody that could have some interest or see benefit in these streams, let them know about LUMIX Live. Other than that, yep, we will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Have an awesome weekend. If you get some cool stuff, if you photograph, if you create some amazing videos, make sure to tag us over on our social channels, LUMIX USA, or if you're someone who Trolls threw around on TikTok. Follow us over on TikTok. We've got a pretty entertaining channel, I believe. And be on the lookout for the Lumix Shutter Showdown, which is going to be premiering here on YouTube. We've got a couple of the teaser videos up there. It was a really cool project, so I encourage you to go take a look at that. Watch the video after this. Yeah, other than that, see y'all next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Later.